The Grand Hall of the High Council on the planet Xylo was a masterpiece of arrogance constructed from singing crystal and light, a place where the air itself hummed with the vibration of supreme authority, and where Ronin, a human mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a tool belt weighing down his hips, felt about as welcome as a fungal infection. He had been hired to repair the ventilation systems in the lower maintenance tunnels, a job considered too menial for the ethereal, energy-based engineering of the Xylosians, but a wrong turn and a malfunctioning service elevator had spit him out right here, in the middle of a royal decree. The light in the room was blinding, refracted through 1,000 diamond-like prisms that made up the ceiling, casting rainbows across the faces of the alien nobility, who stood in silence, their tall, slender forms draped in shimmering fabrics that looked like woven starlight. They were beautiful, terrifyingly so, with skin the color of pale moonlight and eyes that held no pupils, just swirling pools of violet and indigo energy. At the center of the room, on a dais raised high above the floor, sat Emperor Kalen, a being of such intense luminosity that it hurt to look at him directly. But Ronin wasn't looking at the Emperor. His gaze, along with the gaze of every sneering courtier in the room, was fixed on the figure at the base of the throne. She was seated in a floating contraption that looked more like a cage than a chair, a complex lattice of silver metal and pulsing blue veins of biolight that seemed to be holding her prisoner rather than supporting her. Her name was Princess Elara, though the whispers Ronin caught from the courtiers nearby used different names: the Broken One, the Silent Shame, the Defect. Unlike her father, whose light filled the room, Elara's light was dim, flickering like a dying candle. Her legs, draped in heavy ceremonial robes, lay motionless against the footrest of her chair. Her head was bowed, her silver hair cascading forward to hide her face, but Ronin could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the armrests of her prison chair until her knuckles turned white. She was visibly trembling, not from cold but from a humiliation so profound it radiated off her in waves. The Emperor's voice boomed through the hall, not spoken but resonated through the crystals. "We have gathered to discuss the matter of succession," Kalen announced, his tone bored as if discussing the disposal of waste. "As you know, biology is not always perfect, even for us. My daughter Elara remains incomplete. Her connection to the Grand Network is severed. Her legs are useless. She is a drain on our energy reserves and a reminder of genetic failure." Ronin felt a surge of heat in his chest that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. He shifted his weight, his heavy combat boots squeaking slightly on the polished floor, earning him a glare from a nearby guard who looked like he wanted to vaporize the human on the spot. "Before we dive deeper into this moment that's about to change galactic history, drop a quick comment below and tell me if you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were better than you. It really helps the algorithm push this story to others who need to hear it." "Therefore," the Emperor continued, gesturing carelessly with a hand that glowed with power, "I have decided to accept the offer from the draconian warlords. They have a fascination with broken things. They offered a substantial amount of raw dark matter in exchange for her. It seems a fair trade." A ripple of polite laughter went through the court. They were selling her. They were literally selling their own princess to a race known for their brutality because she couldn't walk. Ronin looked at Elara again. She hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, but he saw a single tear, glowing like a diamond, fall from beneath her hair and land on her hand. That single drop of sorrow broke something in Ronin's restraint. He didn't think. He didn't calculate the odds of being disintegrated by the 50 armed guards lining the walls. He just walked. The sound of his heavy boots was thunderous in the delicate acoustic perfection of the hall. Thud, thud, thud. The laughter died instantly. The Emperor stopped speaking. Hundreds of violet eyes turned to stare at the human walking straight toward the throne with a wrench in one hand and a look of absolute determination on his face. "Halt!" a guard shouted, stepping into his path with a spear tipped in crackling energy. Ronin didn't even slow down. "Out of my way," he growled, his voice rough and deep, a stark contrast to the musical tones of the aliens. "I'm checking the merchandise." A gasp went through the room. The sheer audacity of the statement confused the guard just long enough for Ronin to shoulder past him. He walked right up to Elara's chair. Up close, she was even more breathtaking, her features delicate and sharp, her skin flawless despite her dim glow. She looked up at him then, and the shock in her eyes was heartbreaking. She expected him to hurt her or mock her or drag her away. "What are you doing, human?" the Emperor demanded, his voice dropping an octave, shaking the floor. "You are the maintenance worker. You are not permitted to approach the bloodline." "I'm a mechanic," Ronin corrected, dropping to one knee beside Elara's chair. He wasn't bowing, he was inspecting the machine. "And from where I'm standing, the only thing broken in this room is your diagnostic equipment." He looked at Elara, ignoring the Emperor's rising fury. "Hi," he said softly, his voice shifting from gravel to velvet. "I'm Ronin. Do you mind if I take a look at this rig? It looks uncomfortable as hell." Elara blinked, her mouth opening slightly. No one had ever asked her permission for anything. It controls my biorhythms," she whispered, her voice melodic but weak. "It keeps me alive, I cannot stand. My nervous system is disconnected from the flow." "Yeah, that's what they told you," Ronin muttered. He pulled a scanner from his belt and ran it over the silver lattice of the chair. The readings were chaotic. The chair wasn't supporting her, it was suppressing her. It was feeding off her energy, dampening her natural output to keep her weak, likely to make her easier to control. The paralysis wasn't a biological defect, it was a mechanical feedback loop. "Who built this?" Ronin asked, tapping a heavily shielded node near her hip. "The High Healers," Elara said, trembling as the Emperor rose from his throne, his light turning a furious red. "Guards, seize him. Disintegrate him slowly. Hold on," Ronin shouted, holding up a hand. "You want to sell her as broken goods, right? If I prove she's not broken, the deal with the Draconians is void by galactic law. Or are you admitting you don't know how your own daughter works?" It was a gamble, a massive, stupid gamble. But Xylosian pride was legendary. To admit they didn't know something was worse than death. The Emperor paused, his curiosity warring with his arrogance. "You claim you can repair what our greatest minds could not?" "I claim your greatest minds are idiots who over-engineered a toaster," Ronin said, turning back to Elara. "Trust me?" he asked her. It was a crazy question. He was a dirty, smelly human in a room full of gods. But Elara looked into his eyes that were dark and warm and full of a strange, fierce kindness she had never known. And she nodded. "Just a fraction." "Okay," Ronin said. He holstered his scanner and pulled out a simple manual screwdriver, a Phillips head. The courtiers gasped again, whispering in horror at the sight of such a primitive tool. Ronin ignored them. He located the primary regulator valve on the side of the chair. It was a complex piece of biotech, glowing with intimidation. But underneath the flashy lights, it was just a connection point. A joint, and it was loose. Not broken, just loose. The feedback loop was caused because the connection wasn't grounded. The energy meant to go to her legs was leaking out, cycling back, and shorting out her nervous system. "This is going to sting a little," Ronin murmured. He jammed the screwdriver into the access port. Sparks showered down, burning holes in the expensive rug. The guards took a step forward, weapons raised. Elara gasped, her back arching as a jolt of raw electricity surged through the chair. "He is killing her!" a noblewoman shrieked. "No!" Ronin gritted out, twisting the screwdriver with all his strength. The metal groaned. "I'm grounding the circuit." He felt the screw catch. He gave it one final, teeth-gritting turn. Click. The sound was small, but the effect was immediate. The angry, pulsing blue light of the chair turned a calm, steady white. The humming noise that had filled the air around Elara vanished, replaced by silence. And then the light returned. Not the chair's light. Her light. It started at her chest, a soft violet glow that intensified rapidly, spreading down her torso past her hips and flowing like liquid fire into her legs. Elara cried out, not in pain but in shock. She stared down at her own feet. One of her toes twitched, then her ankle turned. The silence in the grand hall was absolute. Even the Emperor seemed frozen in place, his light dimming in the presence of the sudden flare coming from his daughter. "Easy," Ronin said, standing up and offering her his hand. His hand was rough, calloused, and covered in engine grease. It was the most beautiful thing Elara had ever seen. "The feedback loop is gone, your nerves are reconnecting. It's going to feel like pins and needles." Elara looked at his hand, then up at his face. "You fixed it," she breathed. "You just twisted a piece of metal." "I tightened a screw," Ronin corrected with a grin. "Sometimes the smartest people forget to check the basics. Now are we doing this?" "Doing what?" "Walking out of here." Elara took a deep breath. She reached out and grasped Ronin's hand. Her skin was cool, his was burning hot. As their fingers intertwined, a shockwave of energy rippled through the room, cracking several of the nearby crystals. Ronin pulled, and slowly, shakily, Princess Elara stood up. She rose and kept rising. She was tall, taller than Ronin, taller than most of the courtiers. Her robes fell straight, revealing legs that were slender but strong, glowing with reawakened power. She stood on her own 2 feet for the first time in 20 cycles. The court froze. It wasn't just shock, it was terror. Because as Elara stood, the dampeners that had been built into her chair to suppress her power were no longer functioning. Her aura exploded outward, a blinding violet storm that forced the guards to shield their eyes. She wasn't defective, she was an apex. She was more powerful than her father. Impossible, the Emperor whispered, stepping back, his own light looking pathetic compared to the sun that was his daughter. She is a conduit. Elara looked at her father, then at the court that had mocked her, then down at the human who was grinning like an idiot beside her. She didn't feel shame anymore. She felt power and she felt gratitude. The deal with the Draconians is off, Elara announced. Her voice wasn't weak anymore. It resonated with the force of a gravity well, shaking the dust from the high ceiling. I am not broken, I am not for sale, and I am leaving. You cannot leave, the Emperor roared, finding his voice. You belong to the Empire. Guards, seize them both. The human has corrupted her technology. The guards hesitated. Attacking an apex was suicide, but an order was an order. They leveled their spears. Princess? Ronin said, pulling a large wrench from his belt and weighing it in his hand. Now would be a good time to test out those legs. Agreed, Elara said. She took a step. It was awkward, stumbling, but Ronin was there, his arm instantly around her waist, supporting her. The contact seemed to ground her again, focusing her wild energy. Get to the service elevator, Ronin directed, pointing to the hidden panel in the wall he had emerged from. I'll handle the glow sticks. No, Elara said, a fierce smile curving her lips. We will handle them. A guard lunged, thrusting his energy spear at Ronin's chest. Before Ronin could even swing his wrench, Elara raised her free hand. A barrier of solid violet light materialized instantly, deflecting the spear and sending the guard flying backward into a table of crystal goblets. Nice, Ronin whistled. Very nice. They moved together, a strange, mismatched dance. Ronin was the physical anchor, guiding her, checking corners, occasionally swinging his wrench to shatter a guard's helmet or knock a weapon aside. Elara was the artillery, blasting obstacles out of their path with waves of kinetic force, shielding them from energy bolts. They fought their way across the grand hall, the Emperor screaming impotent rage from his throne, unable to unleash his own power for fear of destroying the very room that symbolized his rule. They reached the service elevator. Ronin slammed his fist into the control panel, overriding the lock with a bypass chip. The doors slid open. He shoved Elara inside and jumped in after her, hitting the descent button just as a bolt of plasma scorched the metal frame where his head had been a second ago. The doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the chaotic court. Sudden silence was deafening. They were alone in the dimly lit metal box, descending rapidly into the bowels of the citadel. Ronin slumped against the wall, breathing hard, wiping sweat and grease from his forehead. Elara stood in the center of the elevator, staring at her hands, which were still glowing faintly. She looked at her legs, she wiggled her toes. Then she looked at Ronin. You saved me, she said, the wonder still fresh in her voice. I didn't even know you, and you fought the entire High Council for me. Ronin shrugged, trying to look casual despite his racing heart. I just hate seeing bad engineering. And bullies, mostly bullies. He looked at her, really looked at her. You okay? That was a lot of walking for day one. Elara's legs suddenly gave out as the adrenaline faded. Ronin caught her before she hit the floor, sliding down with her until they were both sitting on the cool metal grating of the elevator. He didn't let go and she didn't pull away. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her glowing hair spilling over his dirty jumpsuit. I have nowhere to go, she whispered. My father will hunt us. The Draconians will be furious. Let him come, Ronin said. My ship is ugly, but she's fast. And I know a few places in the Outer Rim where they don't care about titles or glowing eyes. He hesitated. Besides, you're not useless, Elara. You just took out half the Royal Guard. I think we can find a use for a woman who can bench press a tank with her mind. Elara laughed. It was a rusty, unused sound, but it was genuine. She looked up at him, her violet eyes locking with his brown ones. Ronin, she said, why? Why did you really help me? You could have fixed the vent and left. You risked execution. Ronin looked down at his hands, scarred, dirty human hands. Because I saw the way you were looking at them, he said quietly. Like you were screaming on the inside but couldn't make a sound. I know that look. And when I saw that chair, I knew it wasn't a support system. It was a cage. No one deserves to be caged. Elara reached out and touched his face. Her fingers were warm now, vibrant with life. You tightened the screw, she murmured. You made me whole. You were always whole, princess, Ronin said, his voice rough with emotion. You just needed a jump start. The elevator clanged to a halt at the hangar bay level. Ronin helped her up. This time, she stood steadier. She leaned on him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. My name is not Princess, she said firmly as the doors opened, revealing the battered, rusty hull of Ronin's ship, the Rusty Bucket. My name is Elara, and if you are taking me to the stars, Ronin, then I expect you to teach me how to use that screwdriver. Ronin grinned, the first true smile that had crossed his face in years. Deal, but don't blame me if you get grease on those fancy robes. The escape from Xylo was not clean. Emperor Kalen sent the Royal Armada after them. The chase lasted for 3 days, a desperate game of cat and mouse through asteroid fields and nebulae. But the Rusty Bucket had something the pristine Xylosian ships didn't. A mechanic who pushed his engines past 120% capacity, and a co-pilot who could mentally interface with the ship's shield generators and boost them to godlike levels. They were an impossible team. Ronin kept the ship from falling apart with duct tape and prayers, while Elara sat in the co-pilot seat, a regular chair, Ronin noted with satisfaction, and used her awakening powers to weave through the enemy sensors, like a ghost. When they finally jumped to hyperspace, leaving the furious Xylosian fleet in their dust, the relief was physical. They drifted in the quiet of deep space for weeks. It was during this time that the bond forged in the elevator turned into something deeper. Ronin taught Elara how to walk properly, how to run, how to fix a hyperdrive, and how to swear in 3 different human languages. Elara taught Ronin that silence didn't always mean emptiness, that light could be warm without burning, and that a human mechanic could be worthy of a princess's love. The moment came a month after their escape. They were in the engine room. Ronin was under the main manifold, wrestling with a stubborn coupling. Pass me the 10mm wrench, he called out. A hand, glowing softly with violet light, handed him the tool. He slid out from under the engine to say thanks, but found Elara sitting on the floor right next to him, ignoring the oil stains on her new flight suit. She looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. My legs are strong today, she said. I ran 3 laps around the cargo hold. I saw, Ronin said, wiping his hands on a rag. You're getting faster. Soon you won't need me to lean on. I will always need you to lean on, Elara said, moving closer. Not because I cannot stand, but because I do not want to stand alone. She reached out and took the rag from his hand, tossing it aside. Then she took his face in her hands. You saw me when I was invisible, Ronin. You touched me when I was untouchable. You are not just my mechanic. You are my anchor. Ronin didn't have a clever comeback for that. He just leaned in and kissed her. It was sparks and grease and starlight and humanity all mixed together. It felt like home. Years passed. The legend of the mechanic and the apex princess spread across the galaxy. They didn't hide. They didn't run. They became fixers, not just of machines but of situations. If a colony was being oppressed by a warlord, the Rusty Bucket would drop out of orbit. Ronin would sabotage the warlord's weapons, and Elara would shield the villagers with walls of light. They were a 2-person army, inseparable, unstoppable. They eventually settled on a moon in the Terra Nova system, a place where humans and aliens lived in chaotic harmony. They built a workshop. It was messy and loud and perfect. Elara never went back to Xylo, though rumors said her father eventually was overthrown by a council that realized purely biological leadership was flawed compared to the hybrid potential Elara represented. One evening, 10 years after the day in the Grand Court, Ronin sat on the porch of their workshop watching 2 children chase each other through the tall grass. A boy and a girl. The boy had Ronin's dark hair and messy grin, but when he laughed, his eyes glowed with faint violet energy. The girl looked like a miniature Elara, silver-haired and graceful, but she was carrying a toy wrench and taking apart a hovering drone with focused precision. Elara stepped out onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of caf. She walked with a natural, fluid grace, her paralysis nothing but a distant memory and a bad story. She sat beside Ronin, leaning her head on his shoulder. "They are loud today," she noted, watching the kids. "They're happy," Ronin said, taking the mug. "That's what matters," he looked at his wife. The setting sun caught the silver of her skin and the few gray hairs that were starting to appear in his own beard. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn object. It was a simple Phillips head screw. The original one, he kept it as a reminder. Elara saw it and smiled. She covered his hand with hers, her fingers interlacing with his. "You know," she said softly, "my father used to say that mixing species would dilute the bloodline, that it would create weakness." Ronin watched their son lift a heavy rock with a burst of telekinetic energy so his sister could retrieve her drone. "Yeah, well," Ronin said, kissing the top of Elara's head, "your father never learned how to tighten a screw." Elara laughed, and the sound rang out across the valley, joining the laughter of their children. It was the sound of a life that shouldn't have existed, forged by a single moment of courage and a refusal to accept things as they were. It was the sound of potential realized. And as the stars began to come out, Ronin sat back, holding the woman he loved, watching the family they built, and thought that for a guy who just wanted to fix a ventilation fan, he'd done a pretty damn good job. If you enjoyed this story of how a simple mechanic changed the fate of the galaxy, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We post new stories every week about humans proving the universe wrong. And let me know in the comments, what's the one tool you couldn't live without? For Ronin, it was a screwdriver. For you, maybe it's something else. See you in the next one.